Welcome everyone to Half History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder Historian, and Joseph Mayo was an officer in the 3rd Virginia, part of Kemper's brigade during Pickett's charge. He would write a little over 40 years later his account of what happened at Pickett's charge, and I wanted to share this first-hand account with you. Before dawn the following morning, we moved to our place in the line, our march being carefully concealed from the enemy's view. Soon after we got into position, some 200 yards in the rear of the batteries on Seminary Ridge, General Lee passed in front of us, coming from the right, and a little while afterwards, every man in the ranks was made to know exactly what was the work which had been cut out for us. I remember perfectly well General Kemper's earnest injunction to me to be sure that the 3rd Virginia was told that the commanding general had assigned our division the post of honor that day. He was a Virginian, so were they. Then the arms were stacked and the men allowed to rest at will, but one thing was especially noticeable. From being unusually merry and hilarious, they on a sudden had become as still and thoughtful as Quakers at a love feast. Walking up the line to where Colonel Patton was standing in front of the 7th, I said to him, "This news has brought about an awful seriousness with our fellows, Taz." "Yes," he replied, "and well they may be serious if they really know what is in store for them. I have been up yonder where Deering is, and looked across at the Yankees." Then he told me a good joke he had on our dashing and debonair chief of artillery. He had ridden out on the skirmish line to get a closer observation of the enemy's position when a courier galloped with a message from General Lee. Naturally, he supposed Marse Robert wished to ask him what he had seen of those people that was worth reporting, but he was woefully mistaken. This was all the general had to say: "Major Deering, I do not approve of young officers needlessly exposing themselves. Your place is with your batteries." While we were talking, an order came to move up near the artillery. This was done and final preparations made for the advance. Here let me say that General Kemper's memory was at fault when he said in his letter to Judge David E. Johnston, dated February 4th, 1886, that he and General Garnett were the only officers of Pickett's division who went into battle mounted. He himself gave Colonel Lewis B. Williams of the 1st permission to keep his horse, as he was too unwell to walk, and after the general was shot down, I saw 2 of his staff, Captain William O'Fry and Orderly Walker, still on horseback. Meantime, the blazing sun has reached and passed the meridian, and the long painful interval of suspense is swallowed up in the excruciating reality. Where the 3rd and the greater part of the 7th lay, there was a depression in the ridge, exposing them to the full fury of the tempest shot and shell which soon came raining down upon them. A faint conception of its indescribable horror may be gathered from a few incidents of which I retain to this day a shuddering recollection. At the sound of the signal guns, I went to the center of the regiment in front of the flags and sat down upon a pile of blankets resembling a coil of rope, but the intolerable heat of the sun quickly drove me back to the shelter of the apple tree, under which men and officers of both regiments were crowded together thick as herring in a barrel, where I managed to squeeze in between Colonel Patton and Colonel Colcott. The first shot or 2 flew harmlessly over our heads, but soon they began to get the range, and then came, well, what General Gibbon on the other side called pandemonium. First there was an explosion in the top of our friendly tree, sending a shower of limbs upon us. In a second there was another, followed by a piercing shriek, which caused Patton to spring up and run to see what was the matter. 2 killed outright and 3 frightfully wounded, he said on his return. Immediately after a like cry from another apple tree close by in the midst of the 3rd, Company F had suffered terribly. 1st Lieutenant A.P. Gomer, legs shattered below the knee. Of the Arthur brothers, 2nd and 3rd lieutenants, 1 killed and the other badly hit. Orderly Sergeant Murray, mortally wounded, and of the privates 1 killed and 3 wounded. Then for more than an hour it went on. Nearly every minute the cry of a mortal agony was heard above the roar and rumble of the guns. Colonel Patton called my attention to the gallant bearing of Major Deering as he galloped flag in hand from gun to gun of his battalion, and suggested that it would be safer for us to close up on the artillery, but I told him he must not think of moving without orders, and besides, it was evident that the enemy's fire was rapidly abating, and that the storm would soon be over. The words were barely spoken before it came again, our turn now. I thought at first that it was my adjutant, John Stewart, as a handful of earth mixed with blood and brains struck my shoulder, but they were 2 poor fellows belonging to Company D. One of them, I remember, had a flaming red head, and another, as we believed, mortally wounded, Sergeant Major Davy Johnston, of the 7th. That was among the last shots fired, and as the terrific duel was drawn to a close, General Pickett came riding briskly down the rear of the line, calling to the men to get up and prepare to advance, and remember old Virginia. Our dear old 3rd, it was a heart-rending sight which greeted me as I moved along our decimated ranks, while quickly and without a word of command, the men fell into their places, especially to see our color-bearer, as fine a type of true soldiership as ever stepped beneath the folds of the spotless stars and bars, now lying there stark and stiff, a hideous hole sheer through his stalwart body, and his right hand closed in a death grip around the staff of that beautiful new flag, which today, for the first and last time, had braved the battle and the breeze. The devoted little column moved to the assault with Garnett and Kemper in front and Armistead behind in close supporting distance. Soon after clearing our batteries, it was found necessary to change direction to the left while conducting the movement, which was made in perfect order under a galling flank fire from the Round Top. General Pickett, for the second time, cautioned me to be sure and keep the proper interval with General Garnett. Armistead was expected to catch up and extend the line on the left. Then we swept onward again, straight for the Golgotha of Seminary Ridge, half a mile distant across the open plain, as we neared the Emmitsburg road, along which, behind piles of rails, the enemy's strong line of skirmishers was posted. General Kemper called to me to give attention to matters on the left, which we went to see what troops those were coming up behind us. Glancing after him, I caught a glimpse of a small body of men, compact and solid as a wedge, moving swiftly to the left oblique, as if aiming to uncover Garnett's brigade. They were Armistead's people, and as Kemper cantered down their front on his mettlesome sorrel, they greeted him with a rousing cheer, which I know made his gallant heart leap for joy. At the same moment, I saw a disorderly crowd of men breaking for the rear, and Pickett, with Stuart Symington, Ned Baird, and others, vainly trying to stop the rout. And now the guns of Cushing and Abbott, double-stocked by General Gibbon's express order, reinforced the terrific fire of the infantry behind the stone fence, literally riddling the orchard on the left of the now famous Cadore House, through which my regiment and some of the others passed. While clearing this obstruction, and as we were getting into the shape again, several things were impressed on my memory. First, the amusement it seemed to afford the orderly, who might, if he pleased, have stayed behind with the horses to see me duck my head as a ball whizzed in an ace of my nose. Next, to see Captain Lewis of Company C looking as lazy and lackadaisical, and if possible, more tired and bored than usual, carrying his sword point foremost over his shoulder and addressing his company in that invariable plaintive tone, half command, half entreaty. "Don't crowd, boys, don't crowd. Pretty hot, Captain. I said in passing, it's ridiculous, Colonel, perfectly ridiculous," which in his vocabulary meant as bad could be. Then Captain Tom Hodges directed my attention to a splendid-looking Federal officer, magnificently mounted, straining his horse at full speed along the crest of a hill 100 yards in our front, and both of us calling to our skirmishers, "Don't shoot him, don't shoot him," and lastly the impetuous Kemper, as rising in his stirrups and pointing to the left with his sword, he shouted, "There are the guns, boys, go for them." It was an injudicious order, but they obeyed with a will, and mingled with Garnett's people, pushed rapidly up the heights. Within a few steps of the stone fence, while in the act of shaking hands with General Garnett and congratulating him on being able to be with his men, he had been seriously ill a few days before, I heard someone calling to me, and turning my head, saw that it was Captain Fry. He was mounted, and blood was streaming from his horse's neck. Colonel Terry had sent him to stop the rush to the left. The enemy in force had penetrated our rear. He told me that Kemper had been struck down. It was feared mortally wounded. With the help of Colonel Carrington of the 18th and Major Bentley of the 24th, I hastily gathered a small band together and faced them to meet the new danger. After that, everything was a wild, kaleidoscopic whirl. A man near me seemed to be keeping a tally of the dead for my especial benefit. First it was Patton, then Colcott, then Phillips, and I know not how many more. Colonel Williams was knocked out the saddle by a ball in the shoulder near the brick house, and in falling he was killed by a sword. His little bay mare kept on with the men in the charge. I can see her now as she came limping and sadly crippled down the hill. Seeing the men as they fired throw down their guns and pick up others from the ground, I followed suit, shooting into a flock of blue coats that were pouring down from the right. I noticed how close their flags were together. Probably they were the same people whom Hood and McLaws had handled so roughly the day before. Used up, as General Meade said of them, suddenly there was a hissing sound like the hooded cobra's whisper of death, a deafening explosion, a sharp pang of pain somewhere, a momentary blank, and when I got onto my feet again, There were splinters of bone and lumps of flesh sticking to my clothes. Then I remembered seeing Tolliver, adjutant of the 24th, jumping like a kangaroo and rubbing his crazy bone and blessing the Yankees in a way that did credit to old Jube Early's one-time law partner, and handsome O.C. White, the boy lieutenant of Company A, and taking off his hat to show me where a ball had raised a welt on his scalp and carried away one of his pretty laxing curls, and lastly old Buck Terry, with a peculiar sad smile on his face, standing with poor George and Val Harris and others between the colors of the 11th and 24th, near where now is the pretty monument of Colonel Ward of Massachusetts. I could not hear what he said, but he was pointing rearwards with his sword, and I knew what that meant. As I gave one hurried glance over the field we had traversed, the thought in my mind was repeated at my side, "Oh, Colonel, why don't they support us?" It was Walker, General Kemper's orderly, unhorsed and still unscathed and undaunted, awkward, ungainly, hard-featured, good-natured, simple-minded, stout-hearted Walker, one of the 11th boys, only a private doing his duty with might and main, and recking no more of glory than the ox that has won the prize at a cattle show. 20 paces beyond the spot which is marked to tell where stout old Armistead fell, the foremost hero of them all, a humble private without a name, bit the dust. Calling to the group around me to spread themselves, I led the way back to the woods in the rear of our guns on Seminary Ridge. Realizing painfully our own sad plight, we were of course anxiously concerned for the rest of our people. But soon Marse Robert came along, followed by his faithful aides, the two Charleses, Venable and Marshall. How ineffably grand he appeared, a very anointed king of command, posing for the chisel of Phidias, and looking on him we knew the army was safe. So ended our part in the day's bloody work. I hope this highlighted what went on during Pickett's charge from someone that took part in it. It's an amazing tale, and although it was told 40 years afterwards, you can still feel the emotion that this soldier had remembering that day. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a great day.